Jake Thompson had always considered himself more than just a fan. He was a disciple of Taylor Swift's music. Ever since he heard Love Story blaring from his sister's bedroom at age 14, he had been hooked. He attended every concert within driving distance, dissected her lyrics for hidden messages, and spent hours debating with fellow Swifties about the meaning behind her songs. But unlike most fans, Jake wasn't content just to admire from a distance. He wanted to create. It started innocently. In the basement of his small apartment in Chicago, Jake spent hours remixing Taylor's biggest hits, injecting them with humor and satire. His first parody, All Too Well, The Breakup Guide, turned Swift's heart-wrenching ballad into a comedic tutorial on surviving heartbreak. The video took off, first among niche internet circles, then on TikTok, where Swifties laughed at his cleverly altered lyrics. Encouraged by the response, Jake kept going. Soon, parody became his niche. He reworked Blank Space into a song about online dating disasters. You Belong With Me transformed into a humorous take on student debt. His followers grew, his videos amassed millions of views, and suddenly, people weren't just watching, they were demanding more. But then, Jake made a decision that would change everything. In late 2023, after months of growing online fame, he took his work a step further. He compiled his most viral parodies into a full-length album. 1989, the spoof version. The title was a playful jab at Taylor's beloved pop album, 1989, Taylor's Version, which had just been released as part of her mission to reclaim her master recordings. With little more than a microphone, a laptop, and a YouTube tutorial on music production, Jake polished his tracks, uploaded them to streaming platforms, and hit publish. What happened next caught even him off guard. The album exploded. Fans, both of Swift and comedy music alike, flocked to it. Major YouTubers reviewed it. TikTok trends were built around it. The album raked in streams by the millions. When Shake It Off, Tax Evasion Remix, a satirical song about billionaires dodging taxes, hit the top of a viral chart, Jake realized something. He was making serious money. His Spotify payouts arrived, his YouTube revenue skyrocketed, and for the first time, his dream of making a living off music seemed possible. And then Taylor's team noticed. It started with a simple email. The subject line read, URGENT, copyright infringement, immediate action required. Jake stared at the screen, his stomach twisting. The email was from an unnamed legal representative from Taylor Swift's team, outlining in precise and intimidating legal jargon how his album violated copyright law. It was a cease and desist order, demanding that he remove 1989, the spoof version, from all platforms within 48 hours. If he refused, legal action would follow. He panicked. Was this really happening? At first, he considered complying, but then something changed. As he scrolled through comments on his latest TikTok post, he saw fans rallying around him. Taylor is too powerful to be threatened by a parody, one wrote. You're not stealing. This is fair use, argued another. He began researching copyright law, devouring articles and YouTube videos on fair use and parody protections. He found cases of comedians and musicians who had won lawsuits against major corporations. His confidence grew. Maybe, just maybe, he could fight this. Instead of taking the album down, he did something bold. He hired an attorney, and in doing so, he turned what could have been a quiet takedown into a headline-grabbing scandal. The moment the lawsuit went public, the internet erupted. Taylor Swift sues superfan over viral parody album, screamed entertainment news sites. Search Taylor vs. Jake trended on X, formerly Twitter, with fans fiercely debating the case. Some defended Swift, arguing that an artist of her caliber had every right to protect her work. Others saw it differently. She's a billionaire suing a fan over a joke, one outraged user posted. Didn't Weird Al do this all the time? Another questioned. As the case moved toward trial, Jake found himself thrust into an unfamiliar world of legal briefings, court appearances, and intense media scrutiny. His quiet life as a bedroom musician had been transformed into a legal battle against one of the most powerful women in the music industry. For Taylor, this wasn't just about a single album. It was about setting a precedent. She had spent years reclaiming her work, fighting against corporations who tried to profit off her music. Now she was taking a stand again, but this time against one of her own fans. What neither of them realized was that this lawsuit would soon expose more than just a copyright battle. It would reveal secrets neither had anticipated. The day the trial began, the courthouse steps in downtown Los Angeles were a battlefield of flashing cameras, protest signs, and heated debates. On one side of the barricades, Taylor Swift's most devoted fans had gathered in full force. Some waved homemade signs reading "Protect Artists' Rights" and "Taylor Deserves Justice." Others chanted her name, their unwavering loyalty turning the trial into something akin to a concert pre-show. On the other side, a growing crowd of Jake Thompson's supporters had mobilized just as fiercely. Many were fellow content creators, musicians, and free speech advocates who saw the case as an attack on artistic expression. Their signs read, "Parody is not a crime," and "Swift versus the little guy? Who really wins?" Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was even tenser. Jake, dressed in a navy blue blazer that looked slightly too big for his frame, sat stiffly at the defense table. His lawyer, a sharp-witted copyright attorney named David Klein, whispered final instructions in his ear. Across the aisle, Taylor Swift sat with her team, an unreadable expression on her face. She wore a black suit, elegant, understated, and deliberately neutral. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. This wasn't her first legal battle, but it was the first time she was facing off against one of her own fans. Opening statements, two sides of a war. The trial officially began with the prosecution. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lead attorney for Swift's team began, stepping into the center of the courtroom with the confidence of someone who had won many, many cases. "This is not about shutting down creativity. This is about theft." He turned to the jury, his voice unwavering. "The defendant, Jake Thompson, has taken copyrighted material, songs painstakingly crafted by Ms. Swift, and repurposed them without permission for profit. He didn't just create parodies for fun. He released an entire album. He uploaded it to streaming platforms. He charged for it. And, most importantly, he knowingly and deliberately marketed it in a way that linked it to Mrs. Swift's brand, profiting off her hard work." The attorney let the words settle. Then, with a glance toward the defense, he added, "We believe in fair use. We believe in artistic expression. But copyright law has limits, and today we're here to make sure those limits are respected." Jake swallowed hard. He could feel the jury's eyes on him. Then it was his lawyer's turn. David Klein stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked forward with deliberate ease. He paused for a beat, then spoke. "This case is not about copyright," he said smoothly. "It's about power." The words landed like a spark in dry wood. This is a case of a billionaire superstar using her influence to silence a fan. Mr. Thompson's work is satire, a protected form of expression under U.S. law. Parody has existed for centuries. Comedy is built on it. Weird Al Yankovic built a career on it. So why is this any different? He turned toward the jury, making sure to meet their eyes. Because the plaintiff doesn't like it. Because she wants complete control over every note associated with her name. But the law doesn't work that way. The First Amendment doesn't work that way. And when you hear the evidence, you'll see that my client was well within his rights to create and distribute his work, no matter how uncomfortable it makes the plaintiff. Taylor's jaw tightened ever so slightly. The battle lines were drawn. The testimonies. The trial takes a turn. For the next several days, witnesses took the stand. Music industry experts, copyright lawyers, even psychologists discussing the role of satire in art. But nothing compared to the moment Taylor Swift herself was called to testify. She walked to the witness stand with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent nearly 2 decades in the public eye. Once sworn in, she sat upright, hands folded in her lap, her expression controlled. Klein wasted no time. "Ms. Swift," he began, pacing slightly, "you've fought hard to regain ownership of your music. You've spoken at length about artists having control over their own work. Would you agree?" "Yes," she said evenly. "And yet," he continued, "you have in the past been accused of borrowing from other artists. Is that correct?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Taylor's attorney objected immediately. Irrelevant, but Klein pressed on. I'm simply establishing that Ms. Swift understands the blurry lines of influence, parody, and originality. The judge allowed it. Taylor's expression didn't falter, but for the first time, there was a slight tension in her voice. I have always credited my inspirations appropriately, and I have never stolen another artist's work. Klein nodded. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, he set a folder down on the witness stand. Then I'd like to talk about the other copyright disputes you've been involved in. For the first time, Taylor hesitated. Klein opened the folder and pulled out a document. In 2015, songwriters Sean Hall and Nathan Butler sued you, claiming your lyrics in Shake It Off were copied from their song, Playa's Gone Play. That case was settled out of court, correct? Taylor's attorney objected again. This time, the judge allowed Taylor to answer. She nodded. Yes, but a settlement is not an admission of guilt. Of course, Klein said smoothly. And in 2017, you were accused of lifting elements from another artist's work for Look What You Made Me Do. Also settled, she said, her tone slightly tighter. Klein paused, then looked directly at her. Ms. Swift, isn't it possible that, just like you've drawn inspiration from others, Mr. Thompson was doing the same? That instead of theft, this was simply another case of artistic expression, just as you've defended in the past? Taylor didn't respond immediately. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. She finally exhaled. That's different, she said. Klein didn't press further. He didn't need to. The jury had already heard enough. The shockwave, what comes next? By the time Taylor Swift stepped down from the witness stand, the narrative had shifted. The trial was no longer just about a parody album. It was about power, influence, and whether Taylor Swift was truly the fearless protector of artists' rights, or whether she too played the game when it suited her. Outside the courthouse, the headlines wrote themselves. Taylor Swift under fire for past copyright battles. Jake Thompson's lawyer turns the tables. Is Taylor hypocritical? For Jake, the trial wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about exposing something bigger. And as the closing arguments loomed, one thing was certain. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a battle for public opinion. And that fight was far from over. The courtroom was silent. Jake Thompson sat at the defense table, his fingers gripping the edge of the polished wood. His lawyer, David Klein, leaned in slightly as if trying to steady him. Across the aisle, Taylor Swift remained poised, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped in her lap. The judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and an air of quiet authority, cleared her throat. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged man with glasses, stood. He unfolded the piece of paper in his hands, glancing at it before speaking. We have, Your Honor. Jake exhaled sharply, his stomach twisting. The world felt as if it had shrunk to the size of this one moment, the judgment, a win or a loss. In the matter of Swift versus Thompson, we, the jury, find the defendant. A pause, a hesitation that lasted barely a second, but felt like eternity. Guilty of copyright infringement. Jake closed his eyes. He felt the breath leave his body, his shoulders sinking. The murmurs in the courtroom erupted into a low hum. Gasps from his supporters, a quiet but unmistakable sigh of relief from Taylor's camp. Reporters scribbled furiously, phones buzzed. The judge's voice cut through the noise. Order, she turned to Jake. Mr. Thompson, the court orders you to remove 1989, the spoof version, from all platforms immediately and cease all sales of the album. You are also required to pay statutory damages. Jake barely registered the numbers, a six-figure sum, an amount he could never dream of affording. His lawyer whispered something, an appeal, a legal maneuver, but the words blurred together. His ears were ringing. Then the judge looked at Taylor. Ms. Swift, you have successfully defended your rights in this case. Taylor gave a polite nod. There was no smile, no sign of celebration, just a quiet acknowledgement, a nod of finality. The gavel struck. Court is adjourned. And just like that, It was over. The aftermath. The cost of victory. Jake walked out of the courthouse to a swarm of reporters, their microphones thrust toward him. His lawyer shielded him as best he could, but the questions came from all sides. How do you feel about the verdict? Will you appeal? Do you regret making the album? He didn't answer. He couldn't. When he reached the sidewalk, his supporters were waiting. They weren't as loud as before, not as certain. Some looked angry, others just disappointed. But a few clapped him on the back, telling him, "You fought hard." He nodded, barely hearing them. From across the way, Taylor was leaving too. She moved with quiet purpose, her security forming a barrier between her and the press. The fans who had come for her cheered, but it was subdued, respectful, not frenzied. And then, for just a second, she and Jake locked eyes. There was no hatred there, no gloating, only exhaustion, and then she was gone. The headlines. Who really won? The next morning, Jake woke to a storm. Not the kind that came with thunder and rain, but the kind that broke the internet. Every major publication had covered the verdict. Taylor Swift wins copyright battle against YouTuber. The New York Times. Swift secures legal victory, but at what cost? Rolling Stone. Jake Thompson loses case, gains cult following. Variety, because despite losing in court, Jake had won something else. Attention. His name was everywhere. His follower count had skyrocketed. His remaining videos had millions of new views. Fans were calling him the musician who took on Taylor Swift and survived. Some even donated to a GoFundMe to help him pay his legal fees. And then there were the critics. Taylor's win wasn't as clean as it seemed. While legally victorious, she had emerged with new scrutiny. Articles dissected her past copyright cases, questioning her role as an industry protector. Some headlines turned against her. Taylor Swift defends artist rights unless it's not in her favor? The parody that shook Swift's reputation? It was subtle, but the tide had shifted. She wasn't just a pop star anymore. She was a corporation, a legal force, one willing to take down a fan. And for the first time, some people weren't sure how they felt about that. The final note, a story without an ending. Months passed. The case faded from the headlines, replaced by new scandals, new stories. Jake, financially drained but creatively recharged, had started over. He couldn't release parody music anymore, not without risking another lawsuit. But he had something else now, an audience, a voice. He was working on an album, not a joke, not a parody, but something original, something real. And as for Taylor, she kept moving, kept rising. The trial had left a small crack in her armor, but only just that, a crack. She still filled stadiums, still dominated charts, still ruled an industry. But something had changed. Somewhere in the back of her mind, in the quiet moments between flashing cameras and roaring crowds, she wondered, had she protected her art? Or had she silenced something that could have been more? The music industry had seen battles before. It would see them again. And somewhere, in the endless churn of creativity and power, the next fight was already beginning.